Fellow Rotarians and guests, today I'm delighted to introduce Alison May, a prominent figure in community resilience and emergency preparedness. Serving as Director of Community Risk and Resilience with the CFS, Alison leads initiatives that go beyond traditional emergency response by prioritising proactive measures aimed at strengthening our communities against unforeseen challenges. Alison's background showcases her dedication and service and excellence, with expertise in politics, Asian studies, international relations, program evaluation and operations research. Alison brings a multifaceted perspective to her work. Her impressive 20-year career in defence, including deployments to regions like the Middle East and Asia Pacific, provided her with invaluable insights into operational complexities. As a social scientist, Alison delves into organisational cultures and human behaviour within operational systems, recognising their influence on outcomes. Alison's holistic approach emphasises fostering resilience at both individual and community levels. Alison's transition to her current role at the CFS reflects her commitment to her home state, where she empowers and educates the populace to effectively navigate emergencies. Her vision promotes a shift towards prevention and preparation over reactive responses. Alison is a visionary leader, a seasoned strategist, and a strong advocate for community resilience. Please join me in welcoming Alison May as she shares her insights and experiences with us today.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you so much for that beyond kind and flattering introduction. I'm not sure I recognise myself in it, but lovely words, thank you. So today, my challenge is to speak to you about a lesser known side of the Country Fire Service, the South Australian Country Fire Service, and the component of it that a lot of people in the general population don't know that the CFS is responsible for and don't even know that they need, perhaps. So apologies up front that this isn't a CFS presentation with cool stories about big fires and death-defying heroism. I do have a few war stories from my previous working life with the ADF, but that's certainly for another time. So CFS volunteers do have a lot of cool stories. They are truly humbling, and it's very easy to underestimate. I do it regularly when I'm out in the regions and I get introduced to just the most understated, ordinary people that you might not necessarily normally strike up a conversation with. And you get talking to them and you realise they demonstrate the kind of courage, commitment and the range of skills that many of us can only imagine. I'm always struck by the fact that it's little known that around 70% of the call-outs that our volunteers attend are car accidents. So if you're outside the Adelaide metropolitan area, or even I've seen some big accidents here, you're probably going to see CFS volunteers. These are people who don't have the benefit of years of training in confronting trauma like most first responders. They show up often in the middle of the night and deal with unimaginable tragedy and manage the consequences to their job the next day, their family, often, it might be Christmas Day, and to themselves. And they do this all with just an incredible dignity and grace and go back for more. So that said, while prevention may not be the sexy stuff, it's the side of the CFS that does potentially save more lives than any number of our courageous volunteers on trucks ever can. As we've seen just last week in Victoria, with over 45 houses lost, but not one death from those fires, the importance of listening to warning messages and fully understanding what it means to leave early before you see any evidence of the fire, that's what's going to save lives. Having an understanding of when to leave early and how to leave early can be the difference between awful temporary losses of homes and livelihoods and the loss of lives from which some communities and volunteers never recover. That said, as I learned repeatedly during my defence career and as I continue to learn, it's surprisingly difficult to get people interested in preventing crises. Everyone's interested in responding to events, and that's where the big shiny trucks, the cool equipment, the inspiring teams fighting to overcome adversity, and the stories of survival and plenty of really arresting photo opportunities are. There's rarely eye-catching headlines for wars or crises that didn't happen. It's hard to take interesting photos of things that were deterred or prevented. So this is the battle that we face in attracting public attention and a portion of budgets in the prevention space. But this battle becomes increasingly urgent as we see climate drivers making natural disasters more frequent and more intense. And this means that for CFS, the reality is that our capacity to meet community needs for hazard reduction and response is increasingly going to be outpaced. So it's more important than ever that the community takes responsibility for reducing risk to their families and to their properties and are prepared with plans to survive if the worst should happen. So this is why investment of time and resources in prevention is key. To put it in perspective, the National Emergency Management Agency estimates that by 2050, the cost of natural disasters to Australia will be in the realm of $39 billion per annum. But it's estimated that every dollar spent on prevention has a 3 to 4-fold return that could reduce this cost to around $19 billion a year. One of the best examples of investment in this space is a little-known area of CFS under my directorate that provides advice and approvals on the safety standards of commercial and residential buildings throughout South Australia. While not always welcome in their advice and their assessments, this tiny, passionate team of professionals can tell you about the way a fire is likely to behave around your house or business, or school, or aged care facility, and what building standards you need to meet to make it as safe as possible. However, in order for people to listen to our advice and take steps to prepare to respond to crises in the ways that we recommend, they need to trust us. Now, CFS is considered one of the most trusted brands, institutions in South Australia, and we can never be perfect, but we are considered reliable and trusted to do our best for people on their worst day. CFS is a trusted presence as part of communities, particularly in the most remote ones where we see other companies and government shopfronts shut down. It's often the CFS shed which is the last one standing. And those CFS brigade sheds are often the focal point for social gatherings and for story sharing after a crisis, which is a very important part of recovery. But we need to constantly be careful about making assumptions about trust and remembering that once trust is lost, it's very difficult to regain it. Unpacking trust is a fascinating subject, and it reveals the psychology that underpins every interaction we have with other humans. An essential read on this topic, if anyone's interested, is Charles Feldman's Thin Book of Trust. It defines trust as choosing to make what you value vulnerable to the actions of another. So the relevance of this to interpersonal relationships is pretty clear. We do it with our loved ones on a regular basis. But when we say it slightly differently, the relevance to CFS becomes clear. Trust is having confidence that what is most important to me is safe with you. So our advice messaging on what people need to do in a crisis needs to reflect that we understand how they live and what matters to them most, what they want to protect above all else. This will differ for different parts of the community. It may not always be logical. During a crisis, people reveal some fascinating aspects of what is most important to them. Pets and animals are a classic example of this. Over time, it's become clear that people will put themselves, their families, and even emergency services personnel at risk in their efforts to save pets and livestock. So in recognition of this natural behaviour, we now provide fact sheets on how to practice being ready. The last thing you want to do during a crisis with smoke and wind is be trying to get a reluctant cat into a cat cage. So we encourage people practice this stuff, understand what it will look like trying to do it in a hurry. We hand out promotional items like little pop-out rubber drink bowls to have in your pet emergency go bag that you can grab and get in the car with at short notice. I've even seen examples from the Tasmanian Fire Service of how to wrap your chooks in newspaper so that you can stack them on the back seat of your car. We haven't done a brochure on that yet, but watch this space. Pride and shame are also big drivers of behaviour in a crisis. A recent study that we contributed to with Flinders University on the preparedness behaviours of older South Australians in high-risk areas found a frightening majority of older people didn't have actual bushfire plans and were intending to stay with their homes in the event of a fire. Only 10% of respondents to the study said they would follow emergency service definition of leave early by evacuating the night before or early in the morning on a catastrophic day. Men in particular had not changed their intentions as they got older and were determined to stay and defend. Very often, interestingly, despite the pleas of their wives and families, creating an upsetting scenario where wives reported having to live with the choice to leave them there. This scenario not only puts family members at risk by leaving late with the chances of terrible guilt, but it also creates situations where our volunteer firefighters have to put themselves at greater risk in attempts to rescue people who perhaps shouldn't, who have stayed when they shouldn't have, and for family members who are caught short, leaving later than they planned. There's a demonstrated tendency to attempt to stay and defend properties when people have invested time and money in equipment and protective systems, and they feel too proud to admit that their preparations and their physical capacity may not be enough to stare down a fire to protect their home. And just on that, we work with a lot of people who have properties in the hills who did stay and defend during the 1920 fires, and they're still and they succeeded, but they're still psychologically scarred from what it took and what that fire we were talking about before, what it sounded like, what it felt like. And these are experienced, fit people who were as prepared as you can be, and they weren't prepared for what this beast looked like that they were grappling with. And I think that's something that it's difficult for people to understand. So the foundation of trust in the CFS and prevention advice is for us to understand the community. But the need to build understanding works both ways. One of the factors that is most critical to individuals being resilient in all respects is understanding the risks that they're facing. We can emphasise the importance of building resilience and throw around advice about what resilience should look like. But until community members understand the risks that relate to them, resilience will remain an abstract aspiration. 41 years ago, just the other week, Ash Wednesday was a hard way for many people to understand that they lived in a risk zone. Those fires, along with the Wangari fires on the Eyre Peninsula, were also a jarring lesson of risk to people, particularly about the risks of being in your car and fleeing. Tragically demonstrated by two separate incidents in 2005 fires of women and children dying in their cars while trying to flee a fire. One of the aspects that is of risk that's still not well understood in the community is that the vast majority of homes are actually lost because of ember attack, not by facing a fire front, as many of us imagine. CFS is trying to get people to understand that embers can travel up to 2 kilometres on a hot, windy day. And they can get onto pet beds, on verandas, they can get in cracks between decking, they can get into roof cavities. So even in a relatively suburban setting, you can have a fire well alight under your house or in your roof cavity before you even know about it. Similarly, I still find it hard to comprehend the intensity of radiant heat from a fire, which can begin causing you physical pain before it even gets close enough for a hose to be able to reach. And that's something people often underestimate about what they might be dealing with. So whilst these aren't pleasant things to think about, you can see how sharing stories, listening to stories about risk helps us be more realistic about how to prepare and respond to it. Also, we've learnt about human psychology that if the worst should happen to someone, taking the shock and bewilderment out of how it came about is also a significant factor in having resilience and in rebuilding and psychological recovery. It's also fascinating, and I find extremely helpful, to remember that on average, the lowest point for mental health of bushfire survivors is often 2 to 3 years after the event. So this was reinforced by a University of Adelaide study, I believe, who did a longitudinal study of Ash Wednesday survivors, both the immediate survivors and their families, so their children, that intergenerational trauma. And they found that the sense of injustice, shame and despair created a need for support long after the relief centres and the counselling sessions, the government subsidies and the community support had gone. The initial surge of admirable strength to demonstrate recovery and the busyness of rebuilding wears off, leaving space for the discomfort of hopelessness and grief. And this is where community connection steps up as the single greatest determining factor in individual and community resilience. This is reconfirmed time and time again, including in studies of Hurricane Katrina, which found that both survival rates and recovery rates were directly related to the degrees of community connection. This can be as simple as fostering relationships with our neighbours, making regular times to check in with family near and far, engaging in conversation when going about our daily business at the shops or post office, whatever it might be, and being genuinely curious about how those around us are experiencing life. From a CFS perspective, We know that the actions of a neighbour to start a conversation about a bushfire survival plan, or to knock on a door when a fire is imminent to say, hey, have you heard? What's your plan? All of those things are far more effective than any advertising, web pages or brochures will ever be. But speaking to a gathering of Rotary members whose very purpose is to foster a network of neighbours, friends and community leaders, you clearly all know the power of community and compassion. In that sense, CFS and Rotary are very much alike. We come from the community, and we would cease to exist if there wasn't individuals who are committed to integrity and giving up their time to contribute to something that's greater than themselves. And sometimes that means being highly visible and responding to people's needs on their worst day. But perhaps more often, it's a dedication to providing unseen service to the community in ways that they don't even know that they need. Thank you.
Thank you. Have we got time for questions? Do you want
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Has anyone got any questions for Alison?
Thank you. You bring back memories. I have, funnily enough, lived through living at Kamaraka on a place, an Ash Wednesday fire, and travelling back from Sydney on a plane, fortunately having a group of executives who said, you need to get to your place up at Kamaraka, and we've got the gear in the station wagon at the car park for you. But that was only the beginning. But the following up thing was quite interesting in that I'm not sure whether that was some years ago, but I'm not sure in today's world. I haven't looked at sprinkler systems for roofs, inside roofs, and you know what you do after the fire. You suddenly realise, gee, I've got to get a sprinkler system across the whole of my yard, in the roof, etc., etc. But what I did find was that when you went to buy those, get sprinklers put in, they had plastic in them. And one of the great problems of anything is that plastic melts in the heat, which most people have got no understanding of how hot it is. And I would just wonder, in today's world, when you look at what we do in our gardens, most of it is actually plastic fittings. And as that fire comes through in speed which you just don't understand, isn't that a message that can get out to people? But you know, I found that I was putting into my roof sprinkler system, galvanised pipe, because you don't have plastic, do you? But the fittings on the sprinklers had plastic.
Yeah.
Very lovely speech. It did actually bring back memories which I'm not sure I wanted to have. But I think it is an experience in life which has changed me and the family. But I think people don't understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, and I won't apologise for bringing up the feelings, and it's great that I'm sure you're well experienced in sitting with those and talking about those, and really appreciate that. Look, the sprinkler systems is a question that we often get. We don't officially recommend them. If houses, especially modern houses, are built to what's called BAU level, bushfire attack level standards, that's the best chance that they can have. Sprinkler systems as a defence mechanism are a little bit problematic especially if you're off water tanks. A lot of people have poly tanks these days, which are plastic. But so there's those issues. There's also the timing issue. A lot of people put them on timers, say we'll leave and we'll watch on a camera, and we'll turn it on at the right moment. It's very hard to know when that right moment is. If your cameras are working during a bushfire, in high winds, and on even the best sprinkler systems and the biggest tank, the most you're going to get is like an hour or 3 hours. If you've got embers, it may not. It's not a bad thing to do, but it's not something that should give people sort of false confidence. But yeah, there's so many things. We are such a small staff, and I'd like to have fact sheets on so many topics, and we're gradually ticking through the list of things like that. Like, if you are going to do something, what are the best things that you can do in terms of that hardware infrastructure?
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Alison. That was fantastic. I'm sitting here thinking I'm going to ask you to come and speak to the Burnside community very soon. But I also want to know, is there any evidence, actually distinct evidence rather than just the right thing to do, re-properties and having green grass all around your property and a green space which will halt the intensity of the fire, and the actual trees that one should plant around your property. I heard John Tomich just a few years ago talk to Rotary, and he explained how the fire came up to a row of oak trees and the fire didn't progress. That, I keep mouthing that at council all the time. They're the things that people need to know. What are the most, and agapanthus don't burn. So, hey presto, we've got agapanthus out the front of Burnside Council. I keep thinking we should actually dig them up, transplant some all over the place. But other people hate agapanthus and think we should have all native grasses, etc. But they'll go up in flames. We need green, more of it. So that's my warning to you. I'm going to ask you to come and speak to our community. Thank you.
Consider myself forewarned. Yeah, we do have planting guides on the website of exactly those kind of recommendations. Certainly for commercial premises, your local bushfire management committee does plans, risk reduction plans, which include what's called asset protection zones around properties, and that's things like having either cleared or green grass if possible. It's Australia, it's not always the best, but we have advice on the website around, people love lavender bushes. They're very flammable. We also have a statement on mature trees. We often get applications referred through council where people want to chop down mature trees on the basis of fire hazard. They're actually the opposite. They're quite a protection. As long as you do your fine litter clearing, native gum trees, mature trees, they will catch embers. They're designed to survive in this climate, and so they're ideal. It's the ladder fuels, what we call ladder fuels, the shrubs and bushes that you want to be more careful of. So there is that information out there. Landscapes SA and Conservation SA, I think, and Department of Environmental Water, we all collaborate to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Awesome. Alison, thank you so much. We extend our heartfelt gratitude for such an enlightening presentation. In recognition of your contribution today, we'd like to present to you with two Rotary Adelaide history books.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
100 Not Out, produced by Zing down the back there. And where's Reg? Reg has done the second Adelaide Rotary history book. And also too, funds raised today go towards Rotary Adelaide's community projects and youth projects. So Rotarians, please join me in thanking Alison.